G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. A 36-point loss in round 23 to Sydney had a lot to like, but an all too familiar slow start left us with too much to do after quarter time. Still without an answer on who our senior coach will be in 2027, we preview our clash against Port Adelaide, our last match preview of 2026. I'm Jonathan Walsh and joining me as always is my co-host Ian Hume. Don't know about you, mate. It's been a tough year. I'm ready for it to be over, but I'm also feeling a little bit sad. How are you travelling?
Hey there, Jono. Look, it's certainly not quite a sad that it's ending, but glad it happened time. I certainly wish the season could have gone a lot better than it had, but I do agree, as hard as this year has been on field, I've still loved sitting here with you every week doing the pod, because even in the darkest points of this year, there still has been points of light. And I think that's why I love doing the podcast, because we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. We don't, dive into the depths of despair. We try and find the good things and try and explain the bad things. I think that's why people watch this show and listen to us. Yeah. So I think that's helped me get through the year. And, this week it was another one of those games where, as much as it sucks to have once again been on the losing side, there's actually a lot to like when you really dig into the numbers and even just from watching the game back. There's certainly quite a lot to take out of that. How are you doing, Jono?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Thank you, mate. Yeah, you're right, isn't it? This format forces us, I guess, to an extent to review things, on both sides of the ledger and find the good and the not so good. And yeah, the more you dig into particularly that game against Sydney, there was a lot to like about it. Against the team, I guess, who, and we'll go into the review a little bit in more depth shortly, but a team who, the way they've played throughout the year, probably had the tools to be the toughest matchup of our year. And just given the way that they move the footy and the speed at which they put on the ball and just that top-end star power that they have in that team, it was a little bit daunting going into it, but I think the way that we held up, there's some real bright sparks there for what might come in the years to follow. But back to your original question, mate, I'm doing well. Happy for the VFL. AFLW season started. They had a tough start to the year against a really good team, but again, had some young players that showed really, really good signs. I think I know we're clearly close to announcing the coach and maybe making some other announcements as well. So, I think we're not far away from putting the doom and gloom truly behind us and starting to look to the future. And that's keeping me up and about at the moment, mate.
Indeed. Look, before we get into that Swans review, I do want to say thanks to Joel Sullivan for signing up to the Patreon this week. I also want to give a special shout out to a dad at my eldest son Kieran's school, Damien. Known each other for a bit over a year now through childcare and through Auskick and now through school. He's been an intermittent Don the Stat listener, but yesterday was the first day we realised that I was the person behind the show. So he sent me a random message. He only just realised it. I don't tend to, go out and self-promote. So it's certainly not the first thing I bring up when I meet people that I'm a podcaster. It's a bit cringe in the real world. But hi, Damien. Glad you finally worked it out. Yeah.
No, thanks. Thanks for joining us, Joel, and thanks for listening, Damien. We also had Ange, one of our patrons, come along to the pre-game last week along with her husband and introduce themselves. Nice to have a chat to them and thank you to them for being a part. And speaking of, if you are there on Sunday, and let's hope there's plenty of people there, will be inside or at the Goat Bar inside Gate 5 pre-game on Sunday for anyone that wants to come and say hello. And if you're not sure which ones we are, just if you're a Patreon member, drop a member a message in the Patreon chat and we'll come and find you or hit up Humie, probably the best one on Twitter. And then we'll also be having some end of season drinks on preliminary final Saturday. Details for that are in the Patreon for anyone that's interested. I guess there might be a little bit of a watch this space on that one pending what happens in the VFL season. We might have to be a little bit fluid with that, but if there's no clash with the VFL, we will be on for that one.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the Swans game. We are going to focus on the game itself. Obviously, the tail effects of what's happened in this game have been pretty shocking and really disturbing, some of the things that have come out about what happened post-game, but it doesn't really affect us other than to be really disappointed that this sort of thing continues to happen and women especially have to keep putting up with it. But we're really going to focus on the game because As I sort of said earlier, as a game itself, it certainly was, it wasn't quite a tale of two halves this week as much as it was a tale of one quarter and three quarters against the Swans. And even then, that quarter, there were ups and downs in it. So across that first quarter, Essendon was down by 37 points at the end of it. Across the remaining three quarters, Essendon were up by one. It's been a similar pattern over the last few weeks that we can compete with the best for stretches of games, but we still have long periods where we're just not able to put up with much resistance. The best teams limit the gaps between their best and their worst, both within games and between games, and it's clear that we're nowhere near doing that at this stage of our development.
Yeah, that's right. I think more to the point, mate, the best teams limit opposition scoring when they don't have momentum and then maximise scoring when they do have momentum, and we're not able to do either at the moment. I think everyone's looking for four-quarter performances and for consistency across four quarters. I don't think even the very, very best teams are able to do that, but what they are able to do more often than not is if they're not getting their hands on the footy in and around contests for a period of time, they're able to restrict opposition runs to 2 or 3 goals, whereas in our case, teams are getting 5 or 6 in 10 to 15 minute blocks and blowing the game open, and that's the bit that we really need to close going forward. But then also when we are having those periods and we saw bits of it in the first half of the first quarter where we had plenty of territory, we weren't able to put the score on the board. So it's kind of happening for us at both ends.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that opening quarter. And as I sort of hinted at earlier, even that had different periods within it that showed some positives for the Bombers. And it was really that opening 15 minutes. We're actually okay from a Bombers perspective, and we were matching the Swans to contested possession, and we were getting territory control. So, we were winning the ball back in our forward half. So we had 3 forward half intercepts to the Swans 0 in that period. The ground, as you sort of mentioned there, the game was played in our half of the ground. Even if the Swans were ahead by a goal, they jumped us. They got some, two easy goals. We should have found ways to stop 1 or 2 of them. But it was really that second half of the first quarter where the game got away from us. So in that last 15 minutes of the first quarter, we only had 4 disposals in our forward half. So we just could not get our hands to the ball in dangerous spaces. And the Swans obviously had a field day, particularly with their ball movement. And you touched on it earlier, is that they're a team that is set up to really hurt a team like us, and the way we've defended the ground and been able to stop our lack of ability to stop teams when they've got, run and momentum. And it sort of looked like at the end of that first quarter, this could be a real blowout.
Yeah, it did. It was 3 goals to 2 in the Swans' favour at 14 and a half minutes into that first quarter. Contested possession, as you said, was even. They'd only had 2 uncontested marks. They're not a massive uncontested mark, but still, to play half a quarter of footy and only allow them to take uncontested marks twice was a good result. They'd had just 1 more disposal. It was a real genuine arm wrestle for that first half a quarter. We weren't able to maximise our opportunities. We had 5 forward 50 ground balls, something that, we would have known going into this game was a really important facet in beating the Swans. And we spoke about in the preview, but we just couldn't convert them into enough scoreboard damage. I guess, maybe where we miss Hussein Al-Ashkar to an extent, because he doesn't need a lot of room to operate in. Kako and Unwin and Day Wicks and the like just found it a little bit difficult to be able to navigate through the congestion and set up scoring opportunities.
Yeah. And interestingly, when you think about the Swans and their ball movement from half back and winning the ball back off turnover, and how much damage they do there, it was actually at stoppage where they were doing most of their damage. Was there something you particularly noticed at stoppage that wasn't working for us that meant the Swans were able to get so much value from this score source, particularly in that opening quarter when they went on their run?
Yeah, it looked to me, actually, just to go back a sec, interesting choice, surprising, but maybe not totally surprising that we started with Vicentini in the ruck and Brian started on the bench. I think we all accepted going into it that Vigo was the one of the two who had probably a better forward craft and maybe he would start forward. But we started with Vigo in the ruck up against Grundy. It's a big challenge for the young ruckman. It looked to me that the sort of switch in momentum happened when the change in rucks happened, and maybe that's coincidental. I certainly don't want to blame that on Nick, because I thought he did some good stuff across the game. But yeah, in the second half of that first quarter, they led contested ball by 24-17. So we went from breaking even to Swans getting an advantage disposals were relatively even first half of the quarter. They had one more to them being plus 21 in the second half. They were plus 6 for ground balls. They dominated territory. 6 of our 11 intercepts were in our defensive 50. So we went from defending in the front half of our ground to having to defend in, deep in defence. A good example of that actually is I had a conversation with the guys during the game. Zach Merrett really came to life after quarter time, and particularly in the third quarter, he was quite dominant. The difference was he was defending, either forward or centre or just behind centre versus in that first quarter where he was defending on the last line. Just the difference on pressure on the ball carrier through those periods was really telling. But yeah, we were defending from deep in our own defensive 50 and then having to rebound from there. As a result, we had 8 turnovers in our own defensive half. They scored 3 goals, 1 from those. But so yeah, I don't think it was any one thing, mate, in terms of how we set up a contest and stoppage. I think it was just that they started to get on top in that part of the game. And from there, we weren't able to stop momentum because we weren't winning the ball at the source, and instead we're having to try and transition from deep in our own defensive 50 and ultimately, Danwell burst a bit and they were able to score pretty quickly.
Yeah. Watching it at home and hearing the commentary, that the commentators on the coverage were highlighting how we were coming at the Swans ball movement in that first quarter, but we weren't getting there in time to impact on the disposal of the Swans, which was a big factor in then cutting us apart and finding easy avenues to goal in that opening quarter. But what I really liked from the coaching panel and from the team was that they didn't move away from that way of wanting to defend the ground for the remainder of the game. And for the remainder of that game, more often than not, the players got the balance right and really were able to disrupt the Swans' ball movement. So across the game, the Swans only took the ball from their defensive 50 to forward 50, 18% of the time that they got the ball in their defensive 50. Now, across the season, they've averaged 26%, which is the second best in the comp. So it's already an impressive number doing it then. But when you consider that for the entire this year, teams have taken the ball from their defensive 50 to their forward 50 against us 30% of the time, that's a really excellent result, especially against a team as good as it is the Swans.
Yeah, it's spot on. Best performance in that regard that we've seen this year. Adelaide are the number one team in the comp across the totality of season 2026 in terms of preventing opposition teams transitioning from defensive 50 to forward 50, so coast-to-coast ball movement. So just 18.4% of the time teams do that against the Crows. Geelong, Fremantle and Sydney are all just over 20%. So it was a real elite performance from us in that regard. We had 27 forward half intercepts. The AFL average is 20.8 and Geelong are number one, averaging 25.3. So it was an excellent performance against, again, like we've both said already, against a team that, there were real danger signs that they could potentially really expose us in that part of the game. Over the last 5 weeks, we've been ranked, we're the 8th ranked side in the AFL for preventing coast-to-coast transition. It was kind of okay in game one under Dean Solomon, but that was against a West Coast team who haven't been great at transitioning footy this year. So you kind of, and I think we commented on at the time, kind of just sit back and see how this goes. Let's not celebrate that as an improvement just yet. But then it got worse and worse than it was under Brad Scott for a couple of weeks. And the comment I think we made at the time was, we've changed how we're defending. Could this just be a case of things getting worse before they get better? Well, now it seems that was the case. And over the last, 4 to 5 weeks, it's a part of our game that's got better. And from us to jump from 18th, where we've been the last couple of years, to 8th in terms of defending transition is a really, really good outcome. We've still got some work to do on preventing scores when teams are able to transition. So that's still a little bit high. But in terms of preventing opportunities for them to get inside 50 and score from transition, it's been a big, big improvement.
Yeah, indeed. And something else that I was really pleased to see when going through the numbers following the game is something about what I said in the preview where, considering that we were the worst or the second worst side at defending scores from turnover and the Swans were the best side scoring from turnover, they're trying to limit the Swans to their season average would be a good result considering where both teams are at now. So their season average to this point was 61.7 points from turnover a game. Well, they only ended up scoring 45 points from this source on the weekend. If you think about the Swans season as a whole, only the Pies, Cats and Dockers have kept the Swans to lower scores for intercept this season. So, you think about where those teams are at on the ladder or, their defensive systems in the case of the Magpies. Again, that's a really elite result in terms of defending turnover. And then on the flip side, we were really able to damage them when we won the ball back. So we scored 63 from turnover, which is our second highest for the year after the 70 we scored against the Suns. And it's 21 points higher than our season average. And was also the fifth highest intercept scores the Swans conceded this season. So I'm sure that is something that the coaching staff would have highlighted in the match review. And if our scores in this game could be replicated across a year, that would be really the metrics of a team challenging for a flag. So it does, again, it's just one data point. It's just one game. But does show you what this team is capable of against one of the best, transition and intercept scoring sides in the competition. It's a result in the micro that should give the players a lot of confidence heading into 2027.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I'd be shocked if this didn't come up in the review. I've spoken about it in the past. Dean Solomon more recently spoken about it in press conferences, that just how important reference points are. And I think you can show tape of how other teams do it and say, go out and do it like this. But it's not until you start to do it yourself that message really sinks in. And to be able to go into a preseason and show examples of where we've been able to do it. And now the trick's not, can we do it? We know we can. It's, can we do it for longer? It's a very, very different proposition, I think. And with a developing team, you really do have to celebrate those smaller. In this case, I actually think it's a bigger win than that. But those wins in fundamentals along the way, forward half turnovers, scores against on turnover. We had 76 tackles, which is 6 more than the number 1 ranked team averages per game this year. 72 intercept possessions is equal to the number 1 ranked team in the comp. So to go out there and do that against a team that's going to finish the home and away season second on the ladder, I think is a really, really good reference point to take into preseason.
You're right. And those turnovers and those turnover numbers are really built on pressure. And you mentioned it before, but 76 tackles, that's actually our best result for the year. And there's a couple of things that really impressed me about that number. So firstly, it's on the MCG, which given there's more space, I think it's less conducive to high tackle numbers than some other grounds in the competition. It was also a dry day. So we had a high tackle count against the Cats the other week, but that was a rainy day where it was much more of a congested game. This was a game that was played, in pretty good conditions. And we were still able to get that high amount of tackles. Secondly, our tackle numbers have been trending up these past few weeks, which hasn't traditionally been the case at the back ends of seasons. And then thirdly, it was the younger players that led the way here. So our top 5 tacklers were Sharp and Unwin with 7, Artemis and Vicentini with 6 apiece, and Archer Davies was one of a few with 5. But you've got top 5 players who are 20 years and under leading our tackle count for a game. And that really follows on from much of what we're seeing this season. So the players in our top 10 for average tackles per game, 6 are in that 20 and under age bracket. So it's really great to see that younger brigade leading the way, and let's hope they can keep this level of pressure up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 1 team for pressure acts the last 5 weeks, number 3 for tackles, number 3 for tackles inside 50. And, we've had games where we've done these things in the past, but 5 weeks is starting to become a decent sample size, and some games in there against some good opposition as well. So yeah, bringing these guys in, teaching them the right way is really, really important, and I think we've been able to do that in the second half of the season. Just a side note, mate, this isn't directly related to this game, but a graphic was going around on socials this week that Fremantle have had 10 players that have played every game this season. We've had 2, Zach Merrett and Zach Reid. Zach Reid being able to do that is a big achievement in itself. On the flip side, Freo have had just 2 players under the age of 22 play at all this season. Just 2. They've got a couple now that they're resting guys for the last home and away game that are going to come in this week. But yeah, they've gone through 23 games of an AFL season using just 2 players that are under the age of 22, which is quite remarkable. We've had Caddy play 21 games, Farrow, Roberts, Dave Wicks played 20, Roby 15, Kako, Sharp 14, Kondo 11 and May 10. That's 9 guys, 21 or under, and mostly 20 and under. Caddy turned 21 a couple of weeks ago. Play 10 or more games this season. So when you look at it that lens, you can see why Freo are where they are and why we are where we are. It sort of all stacks up and makes sense for different parts of our journey. But over the last month and a half, we've been playing a type of football that really does value those defensive acts and actions when we don't have the footy. And it's starting to actually translate into, improved, ability to defend transition. Some elements of defending scoreboard are getting better as well.
Yeah. Look, moving on from that game and everyone's favourite segment, the Barrett Award, we are coming towards the end of the season. I think we'll announce the winner of the Barrett Award during the Kirby Medal. A nice little sideshow for them. I'm just trying to finalise how we're going to do the selection for that. I've got a couple of ideas, but I'll come up with something there. But the final nomination from the regular season, there could be some new entrants in the next couple of weeks, but there's a reason that this award is named after who it is. So this person who has risen to the top of his profession is presented by media companies and the AFL organisation itself as a person that should be listened to when it comes to the AFL. Just really continues to be the prime example of just how poor the football public is served by the AFL media. So once again, Damien Barrett has managed to prove that there are further levels that he can descend to with his most recent Sliding Doors article. I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm sure most of you have probably seen it, but for those that haven't, I'm going to read this out to you. This was written by the senior AFL quote-unquote journalist on the AFL page. If Solly has likened some reporting of the Bombers to a bit of an episode of Home and Away, then Struth and Stone and Flame and Crows. He's finally onto something, Solly. But not even Summer Bay is seeing this much backstabbing, fake smiles, fake relationships and incompetence. When asked for comment on the Essendon Football Club, Alf Stewart said, "Don't come the raw prawn with me," and followed it up with Flaming Galahs. Look, John, if this war continues in future years of Don the Stat, we might have to disqualify Sliding Doors articles from appearing in this segment because it is an article specifically designed to rile up those with functioning frontal lobes. But the latest contribution had to be worth a nomination. He's third for this season.
Yeah, I honestly can't get my head around that this guy is the chief AFL correspondent, I think is his official title for the AFL. So not on the AFL, but for the AFL. He's an AFL employee writing for the AFL website. I might have thought that the AFL had a vested interest in actually talking up the game, getting bums on seats, creating an environment where people are better educated, better aware of what's going on, better informed. And then, and there's whatever this is. And as custodians of the game, for them to be publishing this on their own website is pretty remarkable, really. And for him to do that, it's, what a way to make a living, I guess.
Yeah. Look, moving on to some more positive news, we did get the final injury report of the season, and numerous players are out for quote-unquote the season, but some of those are one-week injuries that have meant that their season's going to be over because there's no more AFL games after this. But the pleasing thing from looking through all the names on that injury list was at this point in time, all those injuries should lead those players to be right to go for the first day of pre-season. I think that's the talk with Nick Martin seems to be accelerating. The talk when Lewis Hayes redid his or aggravated his ACL was that he would be right for pre-season. So I think on the whole, barring any injuries this week, touch wood, or any off-season surgeries that have been postponed, we should have a full complement of players ready to go for pre-season, which is going to be really important for the new coach to bed down the standards and the game plan that they want to.
Yeah, it hasn't been a lot to hang our hat on in 2026, but we certainly had an improvement in injury management, the ability of our young players to compete later in games, their ability to prepare young players as well, just to be able to step up and play senior footy, I think has been a real step forward for us. Let's hope none of that changes after Sunday and of course, VFL finals. Let's hope that they go deep and have 3 more games to go. But yeah, if we can get through all of that with a healthy list and hit the ground running in early November, I mean, it's no secret that there's a huge benefit in having a full pre-season. So let's hope that, touch wood, things stay the way they are.
Indeed. More news on the coaching panel front. As you sort of said, we're going to know who our new coach is next week. And as you said, that there might be some more announcements about the structure of the coaching department. But one person who won't be there is David Rath, someone who came in with a big reputation due to his past work at Hawthorn and other clubs, but unfortunately hasn't been able to have a huge impact on Essendon's on-field performance. So just another role that needs to be filled. But again, as we talked about a bit earlier, it's also more of a clean slate for the new coach to set things up the way they want things to function.
Yeah, I guess this is no real surprise. I know data and analytics was obviously an area of real interest for me, but this was something that we were real innovators of it at Essendon. And, it started under Kevin Sheedy really and continued for a little bit beyond that, but not for much longer. In the early 90s or through the 90s and the 2000s, we were well ahead of the pack across the AFL, but like a lot of other parts of our football program, it fell behind and well behind. It's now in a much better place. It's played an important role in our recruiting as well, which, I think even the most pessimistic of Essendon fans will have noted a vast improvement in that over the last couple of years. So, yeah, David, as I understand, it's had a hand in that. So he'll leave at least a bit of a legacy of one part of our football club that's better for him having been there and had an influence. There's a lot of doom and gloom at the moment. It's natural that things aren't ever as bad as they seem. And I do think that the new coaching group will inherit some improved foundations. They'll inherit an improved list and a better functioning football, or a better tooled football department than certainly what Brad Scott and his coaches walked into a few years ago.
Yeah. Speaking of the coaching situation with Carlton locking in what I'm going to call the Fraser Ferry as their coach, and look, funnily enough, for all the talk there's been this year of Solomon being a Welsh plant to undermine Brad Scott, I haven't seen much about Fraser being a Graham Wright hire to undermine Voss, and his appointment almost being a bit of a boat race, as some were claiming was going to be for Solomon or for Hurd, but I'm not bitter about that. But that does leave the Bombers as the only club not to have their coach locked in for next year. There's obviously been a bit of concern about this, and I think people are starting to really be concerned. And obviously there are people who have their favourites and the people that they want to get the job, and are getting concerned that it might not be that person. But as we touched on earlier, from what was said by Solomon, his press conference today, that the new coach will be announced early next week, and we'll also get to take part in exit interviews for players, which is something people had some concern over. I think just on the way in which the fandom and the media are reacting at the moment, I think they're getting a little bit of cabin fever. For those who have seen Muppet Treasure Island, always love that song in that movie. But just when, there's nothing really happening on that front, and people are starting to go a little bit cuckoo bananas with the lack of an announcement. And, I appreciate the club hasn't run a running commentary about the process, and it's almost been watertight, given that the media don't seem to have any idea about what's happening, and they're sort of speculating based on innuendo or astrology or whatever Tom Morris uses to come up with his ideas. Magic 8 Ball, I assume. But it also has led to there being a vacuum which other less savoury parties have begun to fill, and certainly is a bit of a doom loop going on, particularly on socials, and egged on by jackals in the media and lobster shrubs filled with their own sense of self-importance. I'll be very relieved when the coach is announced, because then we'll finally actually have something to talk about.
Yeah, there's lots of emotions, isn't there, mate? Some people have their flag in the ground over a particular candidate, which is fair and reasonable. Some are nervous about the way that it might go. Some just want it over. We're not too far away from that now. I guess the only unanswered question is if it's going to be one announcement or several. So yeah, and then I'm sure whatever announcements we do make will get picked apart, and people will have their views on that. Yeah, I think we just have to ride it out, and yeah, thankfully for us at the moment. Well, no. Yeah, I'll park that.
Well, let's talk about something a bit more positive, and something that's really exciting is the VFL. And we don't tend to give a running commentary on the VFL on this show, but given how well they've performed these past couple of months, we certainly should give them their due, and that they've managed to get all the way up to fifth with a great win over the Swans on the weekend, which means that they actually get a bye this week and get to play a home final next weekend against a team that's finished in between 7th and 10th. And what's really been impressive is both the VFL and AFL listed players been performing fantastically. And I think we're a sneaky chance of going all the way, especially with what's happened with a couple of teams above us, and teams like Geelong as well, who's probably the favourite. Also, we've got finals, AFL finals to worry about, so they've got to focus on that. Yeah, I'm really excited to see how they go in the finals next week. I've already confirmed with my partner that I'll be able to get down to Windy Hill for that final, so I'm excited to see that and how they go. And yeah, I think particularly I really want to give a shout out to the AFL players who are clearly probably going to be moving on, and we're going to be touching on them in a couple of minutes when we go through the potential delistings. But I think some of those players that clearly this is their last year on the list have certainly not carried that into their VFL performances, and they've done a really great job in lifting the standards and providing high energy and helping the younger players in that VFL squad develop and obviously get into a position where they can be playing finals. So I think those players certainly do deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, no, they absolutely do. just on the game against the Swans on the weekend. So we had to win to make the finals, and we're 14 points down at halftime, 6 points down at three-quarter time, and then kicked 7-5 to 2-2 in the last quarter. And their two goals were the last two goals of the game when it was over. It was a real electric performance. The crowd was up and about. The AFL listed players, coaches were there celebrating and high-fiving, which was great to see. They'll certainly hit the finals with a lot of momentum and confidence. We've beaten some of the really good teams in the VFL this year in the run home as well. So I think we should go into the finals really confident. And I think those that have been involved in the VFL program, Matt Rosa had his initial fingerprints on it, of course. His first task when he joined the footy club was to recruit and improve our VFL program. But it goes just beyond that. I think those that are involved have done a super job improving the alignment between VFL and AFL teams and players. And yeah, it's been great to see. And I'm really pleased that they get some reward for efforts. First time in 7 years we've made the finals at VFL level. So that's awesome. And as you said, that first final will be on Windy Hill. It's a midday or 12:05 kickoff on Saturday week, the 29th of August. And yeah, like you, mate, I made sure I cleared the calendar so I can be out there.
Yeah. Big props to Cam Joyce as well, coming in as coach, obviously in tragic circumstances. And I think there was a few question marks over his record as a VFL coach, but he's obviously got them humming. And, for all the coach turnover, he's someone who's performed well and might be kept on. Obviously, that's up in the air. We'll know more in a couple of weeks, but he certainly fulfilled the role that we would have wanted from him when we brought him in so late. I guess just as an add-on, there is a lot of talk about the assistance package we could get from the AFL, and Cal Toomey mentioned that we asked for soft cap relief, but that's been knocked back. But what hasn't been knocked back yet is the idea of getting those extra rookie spots, which I think we're going to need. Would be very handy. We've had quite a good look at some VFL players. If we could bring in any of the VFL players as on that extended rookie list, who would you be wanting to pick up from the VFL?
Yeah, there's a couple that I would hope we have a look at. Boston Dowling is a pretty raw ruckman. I mean, he's 21, so he's been around for a little while, and I know he turned some heads at Richmond. They decided to overlook him. It seems a natural footballer to me. He does need to build on his endurance and work on his ability to cover the ground. I do wonder whether he's someone that with a full AFL pre-season could really make giant strides and improve his fitness and earn a spot on a list. And then the other one I really like is Deacon Kalparkis. He's a Jordan Ridley-style key defender. I think, if Jordan leaves the club, and I guess there's some uncertainty about the future of Ben Mackay, we're certainly going to need to look at our key defensive stocks. He came across from Coburg mid-season, slotted in really well. I find it curious that we went out and brought him across in the middle of the year as well. I do wonder whether that was to have a bit of a look at him, up close and see whether, he can, fill a role for us next year and beyond in terms of being a senior listed player. So, yeah, they're the two I've got my eye on, mate. But speaking of list spots, you've had another updated look at our uncontracted players for next year.
Yeah, indeed. And I put this video together on YouTube. It's something I do fairly, every few months, start to look at the list and who's uncontracted and what their prospects are for whether they'll be on the list. And given that we were coming up to the end of the season, and normally, we would be finding out about who is not getting a contract from post our final game of the season. But I think with the VFL still alive, that might be put back until the VFL is done. I don't think there's a lot of sense in telling a player that's going into VFL finals or announcing that before their season is over, and sort of evaluating, whether these players would get new contracts. That was really well received by the viewers. So thanks everyone who's watched that and commented on that. But I do think that we do need to hear from you, Jono, because I think whilst there's some obvious delistings of our uncontracted players, there's a few difficult calls that need to be made about some players' futures. And there's currently 12 players on Essendon's list who don't have contracts. We're going to find, as soon as the VFL season's over, there'll be some that are announced immediately. There's also going to be some players that are going to be kept in limbo until the end of the trade period, and will depend on the list spots available at the time and also how many draft picks we want to take. So, look, let's start with the main list. There are currently 7 players out of contract in Guelphy, Gresham, Perkins, Cox, Sardis, Unwin, and Calgerine. Where do you stand on each of these?
Yeah, I'll start with the easiest one for me. I think that's Reece Unwin. I liked his game on Sunday. I thought it was a good step forward for him. He had 7 tackles and a couple that didn't quite have the body strength to stick up against some pretty seasoned players. I do think he's a keep. Cal Girine is an interesting one. He's raw. He's seen as or was drafted and seen as a project player. Moved down back late last season, almost out of necessity because of all the injuries we had. That was continued the first half of this year. Finally moved forward and played some good footy, then injured, which has been a bit of a shame because I think we might have seen him at AFL level had that not been the case. I tend to think when you invest in a key position player in the second round of the draft, you usually give them more than 2 years to find their feet. So unless there's something that we don't know in terms of his fitness, his attitude, those kinds of things, then he'd be a keep. Guelphy and Gresham, I think they seem pretty straightforward too. Senior players not getting a game. You don't want to cut too thin on experience. They've really helped the VFL this year, but we have to open up list spots and you would think that they'd be pretty destined to move on. The other three, Cox, Perkins and Sardis, I'm probably going to hold and wait on those, see what happens, with players that we might be able to bring in. I think all three of them have, some AFL attributes. All three have some pretty big gaps as well. But I'd be making some decisions on them once I have a better handle on who might be going. For example, if Merrett and Parrish both leave the footy club, then is Elijah someone that we might be a little bit more keen to hang on to as midfield depth next year, assuming, if he wanted to stay, that is, my decision there might change. I wonder whether Archie Perkins is someone who could benefit from 1 year deals and whether the pressure of being on a 1 year deal might actually help continue to develop his game. He's played some better footy at times in the second half of the year without really putting his hand up and saying, pick me. So, yeah, I think those three, a little bit of water to go under the bridge until I'm in a position to make a commitment one way or the other just yet.
Yeah. And then if you move to the rookie list, we're really an interesting position with the rookie list. We actually have the maximum of 6 with contracts for next year. And barring moving someone from the rookie list to the main list, which I think is in doubt because, again, I think we're going to need at least 5 spots on the main list to take players in the national draft. So that's why the questions over players like Cox, Perkins and Sardis is really up in the air because, as you say, it depends on who leaves of contracted players. And we know probably Merrett is leaving, but there's question marks on Ridley and Parrish and they might be here next year and that changes the equation for some of those players with the need to bring in those draft picks. But, for all the uncontracted rookies, that there's almost reliant on us getting an AFL assistance package with extra rookie spots. So I guess, if we do get that West Coast package of 4 extra rookie spots, how many of the 4 currently uncontracted rookies in Setterfield, Al Hooley, Edwards and McMahon would you be looking at using those spots on?
Yeah, I wouldn't have kept Liam McMahon on the list for 2026, which sounds harsh. I know he showed some signs late last year at senior level, but yeah, I think for me, he's a really, really good VFL player. I think that's a pretty straightforward decision. I like Sardar Hooley. I think he showed some improvement in 2026, but it seems that we might have moved past him. Artemis has come in and taken his spot and showing some really positive signs. Zach Johnson, I rate highly, has a new 2-year deal, isn't getting a game either. So I think, Sard's pushing down the pecking order, and that probably means he'll need to move way to open up a list spot, which would be a little bit harsh, but he just hasn't quite nailed his opportunity for one reason or another. Setterfield's another. I just wait to see what happens. As we move towards trade week and the like. He's been really good for our footy club, particularly off field. He's highly respected and valued. All going well for us, though. He's not playing senior footy next year. And availability continues to be a problem for him. He's still missed a chunk of footy this year as well. Edwards is a tough one. Keep, I think, on a 1-year deal. I'd like to see him get a full preseason and see whether he can add some improved running and defensive attributes to his game. That's the bit that's missing at the moment from him. He's just a bit pedestrian when we have the ball and can go missing when we're not winning it as well. So he needs to be able to find ways to insert himself by getting up and around the ground a little bit more. And I'm not sure he has the fitness to do it just yet. So I think I'll keep him and hope that we can get a preseason and see how he goes next year.
Yeah. And then finally, there's the curious case of Jaden Ewan. As a Cat B rookie, he's apart from the rest of the rookies and almost in a protected spot. And at the beginning of the season, I thought he was a lay down misère to get a new deal, given the way that he ended 2025 and the fact that he started this year in the seedings. But as the year's gone on, I've questioned that more and more. And with talks that we've gone and looked at American players at the combine that we would use that Cat B spot on, and with Killian Burke having a deal for next year, it does give me pause to see whether he does get another year. I guess, do you have much to say on Jaden's future with the side at this stage?
Yeah, this management's as much about who you bring in as who you let go and when you let them go, isn't it? And this is a tricky one because every time you see Jaden, he's got a smile on his face. He seems like he's a really popular member of the team and the group. I think if he is to make it, I do think it's in the position he's playing now as that high half forward in that sort of Neil Bullen role that he played really well for Melbourne and now over at Adelaide. I love his endeavour. I love his attitude, but it's such a brutal industry. I've spoken a lot since we've been doing this show, mate, about, the fact that list sizes could and should expand. And I think Jaden's a really good example of why, because it should be a no-brainer to keep him on the list. He's only, 19 or 20. Give him another year, give him another opportunity in a new position, allow him the time to develop. In the past, it's going a long way back, but someone like Gary O'Donnell had to play 60 or so games at reserves level before he was able to step up and have his first game of senior footy, and then went on to best and fairest winner in a premiership year, captain the club. Jaden is someone I think that if he's going to make it, probably just needs a bit more time to hone his craft, and I hope he gets that opportunity, but it's going to be really tight.
Yeah, definitely, and it's always hard decisions at this time of the year, and some of your favourites players you really enjoy and you enjoy watching and invested into their careers, and unfortunately let go. And you're right, it's just it's a brutal industry, and unfortunately not everyone can have the opportunity that you think they deserve. Well, look, let's move on to previewing the Powers. I don't know if it's coming through on my microphone, but seeing my garage with the rain pouring down certainly typifies our season. Great way to finish the year. But looking at the Power, and we played them all the way back in round 2, and it was one of our worst losses for the season. The Power have gone on to win 5 further games since that game against Richmond, Geelong, West Coast, Adelaide, and North Melbourne. So after that final win they had against North Melbourne, they're actually, whilst they were 15th on the ladder, they actually had a respectable percentage of 101.3. But following that game, Port have really been ravaged by injury. So they've had big losses in 3 of their last 4 games, and that's seen their percentage, which was quite good, drop all the way to 87. Although they've remained in 15th spot on the ladder and will finish the year there regardless of results in the final round.
Yeah, they've lost 6 on the trot, including losses of 59, 97 and 76 points. Admittedly, those big losses were against Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, 3 pretty good teams. Prior to that, they'd been really competitive in 2026. They hadn't lost a game by more than 34 points since they lost to North by 46 points in round 1. So they found a real competitive spirit under Josh Carr in 2026.
Yeah. And I think just for final, I think it's really good to look at their stats from rounds 1 to 18 when, as you say, they were pretty competitive to what's been happening in their last 4 games. So across the first 18 games, they're averaging 80 points 4 per game, and that's dropped to 66 points in the last 4 weeks. And then in their defensive end, they were conceding 81 points a game through those first 18 rounds to a whopping 120 in the last 4 weeks. Their forward entries, they've still been getting the ball forward. So their forward 50 entries were 50 across the first 18 rounds compared to 48 in the last 4 rounds. But their scoring efficiency has really dropped away drastically. That's gone from 53 to 47%. Whilst at the other end, they've conceded 10 more inside 50s in the last 4 rounds compared to the first 18, and their opposition is scoring on 55% of entries compared to 50 for earlier in the year.
Yeah, they've conceded more points than any other team in the comp in the past 5 weeks, and they've been getting punished on turnover, conceding 15 points more per game than the 17th ranked team across that period, and they're 17th for conceding coast-to-coast scores.
One area that the Power has actually been strong in for these past 4 weeks and has actually held up pretty well has been their centre bounce work. The third leading side for centre clearance with plus 2.8 per game, and that's across the last 4 rounds. The stoppage clearance work has gone back, though, as the first 18 rounds to minus 0.6 in the last 4. The contested possession numbers have dropped away, going from minus 3 to minus 6.4, whilst they've been one of the worst scramble teams in the comp this year. all year. So they're losing 8 more ground balls than their opponents, and that's in the last 4 weeks. But across the season, they haven't been great in this area of the game as well.
Yeah, they're conceding scores from clearance too. They're ranked 16th the past 5 weeks, although we're 18th in both points for and points against for clearance in that period. So it hasn't been a strong suit for us by any stretch. They're number 2 in the AFL for first possession over the last 5 weeks. So it's certainly helping them get a bit more score themselves. But they're just below AFL average for clearance score. So it's certainly not a weapon for them.
Yeah. One thing that's happened to the Power these last few weeks is that teams have really been using handball to hurt them. And the Power have really been unable to stop, ball movement by hand. They're conceding a kick to handball ratio of 1.23, which is the second lowest in the comp. So teams are really encouraged to use the ball by hand against the Power. And this, so, they're not conceding a whole lot of marks, but that's because their opposition are essentially handballing their way down the ground.
Yeah, they have been a team that's liked to control possession this season. I guess there's some parallels a little bit to how we played under Brad Scott in his first year of coach, a bit more ball control, defend through possession. They averaged 96.8 marks per game across the whole season, ranked 6th, but it was higher than that. It's come back. Over the last 5 weeks, they've averaged just 88.8, which is below the AFL average of 89.8. A lot of that really is down to the pressure they've been under. Over the last 5 weeks, they've had the most pressure acts against them, the 4th most tackles against, and the 3rd most tackles inside 50 against, which has ultimately led to them conceding the 2nd most intercept possessions in the competition. So they really have been swarmed and they've been coughing up the ball pretty readily.
You're right. They're coughing up the ball 9.6 more times in a game than their opponents over the past 4 weeks here. Their ball control has been really poor. And they're also really open in their defensive 50. So they're conceding 15 marks per game inside 50 these last few weeks, and that's quite high.
Yeah, they've played some good teams over the last month, which we noted up top, but we've been able to apply pressure to some good teams into coughing up the footy ourselves. So if we can replicate that, I do think we give ourselves a great chance of finishing the season off with a win.
Yeah. Well, as a Sunday game, we do once again have the joys of the extended bench. Rarity for Essendon. We've actually had no confirmed outs at this stage, with only the 3 players added to the squad in Elijah Sardis, Hussein Alashka, and Lockie Blackerson. Of those 3, the only one that I would expect to come in is Alashka, given that he was only rested last week or managed last week. It sounds like, and obviously we've spoken about him in the past couple of weeks and his impact on the forward line and forward 50 tackles and pressure. You expect for him to find a way into that side. I think Harry Jones came in for him last week because he wanted some more height in the back line, but with Port playing both Georgiades and Marshall, as well as a couple of, almost essentially 3 ruckmen, I think Jones probably keeps his spot. We'll find another way to bring Hussein in. Yeah,
they do have some height forward. They've got Whitlock there too, but I'm not going to bother guessing what might happen here, mate. I've got no idea. I get it wrong every week. I do hope that we see Hussein Al-Ashkar play. It'd be nice for him to top off the season with another taste of senior footy, because I think he's shown some really promising sides. Port Adelaide, they've got 2 confirmed outs. Alir has concussion. Jason Horne-Francis, toe injury. Also means Zach Butters hasn't made it back into the side for what would have likely been his last game for Port Adelaide. Their ins are Darcy Byrne, Jones, Will Brodie, Christian Moraes, Xavier Walsh, and Will Lorenz. Given their midfield challenge, I wouldn't be surprised if both Brodie and Moraes come into this side. I guess the one caveat on Brodie is he could be joining, if he did play, join a midfield that with Drew and Wines in there is already a little bit on the slow side. Cousin Xavier, not my real cousin, is a 195 centimetre key position player that can play at both ends. He'd be on debut if he plays. I guess he could be seen as a replacement for Alir, unless they plan on sending Marshall back and using Walsh forward or going a bit smaller. It's a young defensive group. You mentioned the 3 ruckmen. Dante Vigo, Vicentini's brother, has been playing as a key defender, which is a bit of a shame, really, because it probably means we won't see the 2 brothers go up against one another in the ruck. And then their other key defender has been Harrison Ram. He's a 202 centimetre key defender at just 19 years of age. So there's a bit of an opportunity here if we can get them some supply that Caddy and Wright, could do some real damage if we can get the ball down there frequently enough.
Yeah, and then a big day for the Vicentini family. I'm sure it's exciting for them to see both of their boys play on the same ground. And whilst they probably won't go up against each other in the centre bounce with the way in which Vigo went forward last week, you'd expect them to match up on each other at some stage, and that'll be a great sign. It's always great to see that sort of thing happen at AFL level. Well, look, let's turn into the game itself. And, the last game of the season, we've just gone through a whole heap of areas where the Power have been really poor these last few weeks. But the one thing that they haven't been poor at is winning clearance, particularly centre clearance. And we know that, and long-time listeners of this show know that, territory is super important for us, and it's really hard for us to play from our back half. So that centre clearance in particular, and clearance in general, is going to be really important if we're going to be able to compete in this game. And as we said, this is something the Power have been doing quite well these past 4 weeks as the rest of the game has sort of fallen away.
Yeah, you're right. Will Brodie is a player that has shown he's more than capable of winning balls and inside mid at AFL level, over the journey at the Gold Coast Suns and at Freo, but he just lacks the transitional running the game now demands of midfielders. Wines and Drew, as I touched on, are already in that mix. They're both very good contested mids. Drew in particular, very good defensively as well. They've added Joe Richards to the mix. He gives them a dynamic option through there. He's got some real pace. Brodie's only played the one game this year, so maybe we won't see him back in this week, but he did have 5 hard ball gets. Wines is their next best ranked in that area. So they haven't necessarily lost that inside grunt. What they have lost without Butters and Francis is that inside out, that midfielder option, that player that can win their own footy but then accelerate and explode out of contest as well. That said, we're without Roby and we're without Durham, who are our 2 best at doing that. So that probably evens things up a little bit. The last 5 weeks, they've been second for first possession, but 14th for converting a first possession into a clearance. So they're getting their hands on it, but they haven't been able to turn that into territory. I think we have the method here, and that is to ensure we're competitive and combative at the source, keep contest balance really sharp, and if we can limit their ability to carry the ball out of clearance, because they haven't, that's been their downfall recently. If they're winning clearance, we want to make sure that as frequently as possible when they win it, it's that hat kick out of there, and they're not able to get the ball to outside runners.
Yeah. Now, we've touched on another thing we've touched on is the fact that Port are missing their 3 best midfielders in Butters, Rosie and Horne-Francis. They're missing their best defender in Alir. So we'll touch on their forward line later, because that's where there still is some quality there. But I guess in their midfield, in their back line, who are the players we have to worry about given they've lost so much talent?
Yeah, Jordan Sweet's been playing some good footy this year as their number 1 ruck. I think he's a bit of an underappreciated ruckman in the competition. Alex Van Wyk is a 22-year-old in game number 3. He'll be Sweet's backup, but I think Sweet's a real challenge that Vigo and Nick Bryan shouldn't take lightly. I really like Joe Richards. At different times this year, he has, I've said, he's run through the midfield. I think he was their most prolific midfielder last week in terms of centre bounce attendances. So it's likely he just plays as an out-and-out mid on Sunday. He's creative. He cuts through traffic really well, and he has some real speed as well. So he's their point of difference through there. We've seen Christian Moraes play well against us in his young career already. He's got some attributes that actually remind me a little bit of Zach Butters. He's really, really clean. He's not afraid to put his head over it. And he's a really, really good runner, gets up and down the ground really, really well. So, we may see him half forward and rotating through the midfield. And then the other player who I really like at Port is Jace Burgoyne, whether that's at halfback or through the middle, maybe a bit of wing as well. He's a player that just has all those attributes that trouble us. We saw what Brad Hill did against us a few weeks ago against the Swans. He's a really good runner. He's got good pace. He's a really good user. So, he'd be one that I'd probably be most inclined to put the clamps on, I think.
Yeah. And then on the Port forward line, with all the news that the Butters is likely to leave, it's a really, a great news story for Power fans that Mitch Georgiades is re-signing for them. There's been a lot of talk these past couple of years that he would be looking to go home to Perth. So it's a great news for them that he's going to stick with the Power. And he's obviously their big key forward threat, whilst Corey Durden has been their other preeminent goal kicker this year with 32 as a small forward. So, pretty clear matchups for Reid and McGrath respectively there. And obviously Zach Reid's breakout game last year was when he was moved on to Georgiades. So he should take some confidence from his performance last year on him. I guess who are the other players we have to be concerned about that are goal kicking threats for the Power?
Yeah, really good goal return Corey Durden kicking 32 goals this year, and I guess that doesn't get talked about in terms of, probably enough in terms of that performance, because Port haven't been winning too many games, but that's a really good return for him. Whitlock's a second-year key position forward. He's played every game this year. He's averaged a goal a game, which, for a second-year key forward's a really good return. Joe Berry from the same draft is a small forward. He's found it a little bit harder at times, but 14 goals from 22 games. So those two are both certainly capable of hitting the scoreboard. Todd Marshall, you go back 3 or 4 years ago, it looked like he was going to become one of the real, dominant key forwards of the competition. He's never, mainly due to injury, never really quite lived up to that. He's not at the peak of his powers, but he remains a threat. When he's on, he can kick goals from anywhere. So he's a watch as well. And that does, with Georgiades, Whitlock, and Todd Marshall, give them 3 genuine key forwards. And in the case of Whitlock and Marshall, we'll be giving up a lot of height, given Reed's going to get that Georgiades matchup, who's the shorter of the 3 of them. So it's going to be a little bit of an ask, and maybe that potentially points to Blackiston playing key position back this week to cover one of those.
Yeah. Look, let's move on to the final thoughts, and with the way in which the last round is going to play out with Richmond's game down the highway at Geelong. I think we can all imagine what's going to be the result there. It probably does mean that an Essendon win in this game will mean that we will go above Richmond on the ladder and finish second last. There's a lot of talk about what's best for Essendon and whether they should be trying to get that number 1 pick and quote unquote tank this game to ensure that they do have that number 1 pick and all the subsequent benefits you get from that number 1 pick in the preseason draft, being able to leverage bids on NGA players and father sons. Or is it more important to win the game for our captain's 200th game? Someone who cops a lot of flack, but someone who always tries to get the best out of himself on the field, coming off a really strong performance last week against the Swans as well. It's probably Zach Merrett's last game for the club, so it'd be great to win for both of those reasons, and also for the younger players on the list to have a win to go into the off season, for the fans to end the year with a win and a little bit of positivity heading into the coaching announcement. There's a rational side that says you get more out of finishing last, and there's the emotional side of getting that win there. I don't know what I'm going to ask you. I know what you're going to say, but I'll let you say it.
Yeah, no, I want to hear that song, mate, for lots of reasons. For these young players in particular, and I think for Solly to get another win before he finishes up what's been a tough but really professional performance by him as our interim coach. I think Andy's covered a huge amount of the load this year as well as a captain in his first year as captain, with all the noise around Zach, last off season and at different times throughout this year. I think he's done a really good job. Everyone talks about how unified and how connected the young group are. Andy McGrath's had a massive role in that, and that shouldn't be undervalued or underappreciated. So for him, I would love it if we could chair him off to, with a win in his 200th game. And then in terms of Zach, I'm not sure I'm emotionally stable at the moment, enough at the moment to comprehend that this might be the last time we see the champ in red and black. I think I'm just going to go to the game and enjoy watching him play, and then maintain a level of delusion that maybe it won't be the last time and we see him next year.
Well, look, that will do us for the last preview of the season. What a mountain range we've traversed. There's so much people to thank for this year of Don the Start, but there's still a few months to go with the announcement of the new coach, our season reviews, the Jack Kirby medal, the trade and draft periods. So I will save all the big thank yous for that final episode of the year in December. But once again, big thanks to you as always, Jono, both for tonight and for the season. Obviously, this show doesn't exist without you. Thank you again so much for bringing me on this journey. Any final words from you, mate?
No, well said, mate. You're right. We've had a lot of help this year and in years gone by, and a lot of support from a lot of great people. And, I'd like to think all of those people know who they are. And over the coming weeks, we'll make sure that we thank them both in person and on air. But thank you to everyone who's contributed. Thank you to everyone who's listened and supported and liked and left reviews on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify and comments on YouTube and, shared what we do with friends and family and everyone else. It really does mean a lot to both of us. And thanks to everyone who's signed up to the Patreon as well. I think we both feel a little bit guilty and overwhelmed at times that so many people are prepared to do that and share this ride with us. And we're really grateful for that. It is a more family-friendly time slot this week, so hopefully we can get a big turnout to marvel, cheer this young group, celebrate Andy's 200th game, give Solly a massive round of applause off the field as well, because I think that's very well deserved. And if you do make it along, pop along to Go Bar pre-game if you can. And huge thanks to you too, mate. It's a real privilege to go on this journey with you. I've loved every minute, and thank you very much for all the hard work that you've done.
Cheers there, mate. For the last time, previewing your match, stay safe, everyone. Go Dons.